Jennifer Campbell, creator and host of the Systemic Leadership Summit. Welcome to this session. And in today's session, we'll be discussing a case study about how hearing your employees' and customers' voices can make a world of a difference in your organization. My guest for today will share his case study in which he led his organization to a different level when it comes down to massively increasing customer retention and loyalty. And his name is Jeremy Lloyd. Jeremy works with customer solutions from an execution to a leadership level and focuses on key areas such as leading customer solutions from insight to scale and operation in medical devices and pharmaceuticals, improving therapy value and outcomes for the business and customers with journey work on pains and gains, forming and leading centers of expertise and services teams to deploy customer solutions in partnership with country leaders, and shaping visionary business models through a global career across medical technology and consulting. Jeremy built these strengths over extensive multinational work. His first years in investment banks and a startup taught him about data mining, technology deployments, services setup, and solution sales. Then, in his 8 years with Accenture, he spent 4 years in London and 4 years in China selling and leading outsourcing or strategic change programs for a range of customers, including pharmaceuticals. He moved from consulting to medical technology with Medtronic and was with them for 5 years. He ran a huge organizational change program from Singapore and then moved to Switzerland to run customer and commercial operations for diabetes. While leading this 80-person team, he also led many services and tech platform development initiatives. These experiences gave Jeremy a deep expertise with customer solutions deployment, so he understands the relationship between processes, services management, and technological platforms. Now, over the last 4 to 5 years, he has led strategic customer solutions, driving both annual strategy planning and special ventures focused on digital technology, business model innovation, or new partnerships. Jeremy has earned a depth of solutions expertise earned across industries and regions and specialized in healthcare for many years now. For him, the great thing about working with patient and customer solutions in healthcare is the opportunity to use his skills to make an impact on something that matters to him, which is healthcare. And today he's here to share a case study from his own experience with us in the Systemic Leadership Summit. So a very warm welcome to you, Jeremy. I'm so glad to have you here in our summit.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for contacting me and inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and we are going to be diving into one of your profound experiences in your career, and to also look at it from a systemic perspective, but combined with the leader in business perspective as we are moving into more in this summit. We really want to hear from people who had different experiences like yourself. And so, yeah, I'm just really happy to be discussing this case study with you. And before we dive into the content of it, I'd like to ask you, why is it that you are so passionate about sharing this particular experience with us?
I think for me, this was an example where all of the aspects that are important to me, both personally and career-wise, were able to come together in one program, in one project. We were able to do something creative. We were given the freedom to be creative. And we created real meaning, both for our customers who were patients living with diabetes and for our employees. So it was a great example of how many elements can come together. And we had a lot of really positive feedback. So all in all, it was just one of those experiences where you think, well, that went quite well. That was a good one. So I learned a lot. And for me, it also, I don't know how it is for you and others, one of those experiences where at the end of it, I thought, well, this is actually what I want to do. I want to do work like this most of the time.
Yeah.
you know. And so it helped form a vision for me of how I'd like to spend the rest of my career.
Wow, wow. So that means that you actually saying that this case study that we're going to be diving into was really on purpose for you. It's really about, oh, this is the core of why I'm doing this work. This is what I actually want to contribute to the world.
Yes, and it didn't start out that way. It started out really different. And it started out as interesting, as a problem to solve and a white space, which I always enjoy, you know, where there's not a lot of definition and you need to just figure it out as you go along. But then it became this more meaningful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in the course of that, during that process, I then realized that doing work that really evokes emotion in people and helps people find meaning, and for customers, especially when they're a patient, but also normal other everyday commercial customers, when you can be truly authentic, is a nice combination, and gives meaning and a lot of passion for my work.
Yeah.
And so this started to happen as we were running this program, and so I think, in fact, the dedication and the excitement for what we're doing built as it ran. So that was a good part of it.
Yeah, yeah. So what you're saying, how I translate that is that you're working on a project that had ingredients that made, I would like to put it as, you felt like you were working on something that truly matters, that
Yeah.
truly,
Yes.
um, yeah, yeah. Well, I
Yes.
love talking about things that truly matter,
Exactly.
problems that truly matter. And
Kind of shared value debate and that sort of thing, you know. And
yeah,
we didn't do that in its entirety, but we started to walk a little bit of the way there, and it felt like what we did was important.
yeah, yeah. And so you speak about the customer also, and I'd like to hear from you. Why is maybe predominantly this customer aspect to it so important to you in your work?
There's two things. I think in my career, I've always been a customer person.
Mm-hmm.
I've had as you said in the intro, I mostly have had a professional services career. And
Mm-hmm.
even when I left professional services, I always kept a professional services mindset.
Yeah.
So for me, there was always a client. There was always a customer or a client who had a need, and I love solving problems.
Yeah.
But the key to it is, you know, solving the problem that the person needs solved.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, in some of professional services, what we would find is the customer would tell you their problem, and you land up molding their problem into a solution that you want to sell. That's
Ah.
that's different from solving their problem.
Yeah.
And so this whole question through my career started to build of solving problems is good, listening to the customer is essential, but being authentic in that and truly doing what they really need is the most important thing, and difficult. And then when I left professional services and moved to medical products companies, because of the massive investment all of these companies make in R&D, and the huge skill that they have with technology, with chemistry, and also with customer engagement and training.
Yeah.
They spend a huge amount of time developing products and training people on those products. And in so doing, have a culture around this is what we do to fulfill the customer's need, especially when they have clinical evidence that their product is a therapy, right? Has therapeutic benefit.
Yeah.
There is, however, still that missing element of what customers as people believe, want, and need in their daily life.
Yeah.
And the more that companies can do to really try to understand this, and you know, this has been such an important agenda for the past few years, you know, it can only benefit them. And so this whole area for me is just one, I think personally and through my career, has been an evolving and growing interest.
Yeah, yeah. So things that I pick up on what you just said is the authenticity about working on real problems and solving the real problems instead of trying to mold customers into a solution that you then want to sell. And what I also hear you say is that within the context of the case situation is that you find yourself in an industry where R&D is very important and where there's actually a tendency to go more into a solution that we want to sell because we have such experience in researching what could be good solutions. And so, yeah, let's dive into this situation that elicited so much for you and in the customers and in the employees involved. So could you share more about the onset of the situation that you found yourself in, or the project at the beginning of what it was all about?
Yeah, sure. So we were lucky in the beginning in that the request to start the project came from senior leadership.
Yeah.
And so they had realized a specific situation that we were in and asked us to create a program to intervene. But they didn't tell us how to do it. And so it's really all in the method that we eventually took after some errors that brought the results. And so the situation was that the company is a market leader with its products. The products are very high quality and market leading. They do face consistent disruptive threats.
Yeah.
To startups, incumbents, larger competitors, and this is a constant factor in the medical devices market, and especially with diabetes because it is such a global phenomenon.
Yeah.
And so, but they were, there's a constant discussion about this reality. And then there was also a discussion, there were some surveys completed where they surveyed the customer base. And they found that over half the customers were loyal to the brand, not because of the products, but because of the services.
Well, that's interesting.
Right. And at the same time, about 60% of the operating costs of the business were service related, not product related, even though there was a massive investment in product development. The amount of investment in service personnel, Salesforce people, service desk people, etc., was huge, and technology.
Yeah.
And so the president at that time started to say, well, so most of our customers love our services the most. We spend most of our money on services. We believe our services are great. What are we doing about telling people about this and making this into an asset? And the answer was nothing. So, which is kind of typical for a lot of product-centric businesses and very typical in the medical field, where if you have a brochure telling you about a therapy or a device, the first 10 pages will be all about the product.
Yeah.
And also about the condition and the therapy. And then page 11 or 12 will have a little, this is our service hotline box at the end. It's really not anything to do with how the services are great. It's just we have services. More like technical support than actual patient or customer or a human support.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what you're actually saying is, and it's really interesting because I recognize this from other industries as well. For example, in the automotive industry, where certain brands were waking up and saying, wait a minute, customer retention and loyalty is very much about how their experience is, both the sales experience and the after sales experience.
Yeah.
So totally different industry, but it's the similar thing. Do we focus on the price tag on our vehicles or the technicalities of what our product is capable of? Exactly. Or do we focus on the experience that our customers have as soon as they touch upon our brand until they actually purchase or actually become our customers? Yeah.
There's a unique factor to the business model of a diabetes medical device business. Is that the upfront sale is crucial and you sell what is a diabetes pump to a patient or a caregiver. They accept that and pay it, and that's an upfront revenue source, and so speaking commercially now. But then the warranty for that product is 4 years. And so once they are wearing the product, for the next 4 years, they still need to purchase consumables, which are these little plastic infusion sets and cannulas that link the pump, the diabetes pump, to their body. And that's actually half of the revenue. And the only way to securely sell and maintain and support those customers and patients through that 4-year period is with services. And so your business model is you've invested most of your cost in services. Most of your customers love you because of, or are only loyal to you because of services, and you're reliant on services for 50% of your warranty revenue for the warranty period. Yet you are not marketing your services in any way. That was the situation we were in.
Yeah. And so what you're actually saying is people are obliged to buy those, to be in that particular service with this particular organization where they buy the pump, because I can imagine that that is complementary, or are they able to buy a pump and then go elsewhere for the services?
They, if they have technical issues with the product, they need to come back to the manufacturer. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes the technical, and so there's a range of technical issues from cosmetic to serious, but at the same time, there's a lot of usability issues. And so they because they know the service is good, and once they start to try it, they keep using it. But of course, for their therapy advice, they go to their caregivers. But they can't get product-based technical support and user support for a therapy from anyone else other than the manufacturer.
Right. So there's this dependency there. There is this almost automatic loyalty then.
Yes. Well, they can look online and they can go to peer groups or patient groups and get advice very good advice from other people who are using the therapy. But really for the manufacturer authorized advice and for what the manufacturer would think of is the right advice, they need to call the manufacturer.
Yeah. Okay. So if this was the onset of the project and there was this leader who said, okay, why aren't we marketing and telling people about our services? What was then the exact assignment that you had?
So the assignment was just one line, really. It was build a service brand, and go and figure out how to build a service brand, build it, create it, and launch it. And so that was it. And for me, that's a kind of perfect assignment, not too heavy on the detail. So and that's actually why we started to make our first mistakes. And I'm not a marketing professional. I'm more of a services and solutions person. And they didn't give this to the marketing leader because that person was totally swamped with other stuff at the time. And they wanted this done at the same time. So they said, well, can you, in addition to other things you're doing, can you look at this? And I'd always wanted to try a bit of marketing. So I said, it was a great opportunity. So I said, sure. Yeah. But then we started to make our first mistakes in that we did a whole lot of branding research. What are interesting brands? How do you brand? And got into the technicalities of how to build a brand, which is really equivalent to getting into the technicalities of how to build a great product before you speak to think about what people need.
Yeah, exactly.
You have a whole lot of gifted chemists or whoever, and you come together and you go, oh, if we create this, it will be awesome. And then further down the line, someone says, now let's show this to someone who might buy it or use it. And then it's too late. And so we almost made that mistake. And the first few efforts at engaging the leadership team with our project were not going well. And it was because our output was somehow not authentic enough. It was a little bit bland, a little bit Me Too in terms of just the same as, we found the same kind of messaging from insurance companies.
Yeah.
And people are saying, what are you doing? Is this really what we're about? So we did this complete pivot away from just looking at brand methods and started down and using this methodology of the customer value proposition. And so we went down the pains and gains and jobs to be done route first. And that's when we started to really understand that we were on the right track.
Right. So let's stay with this step for just a minute, because what was the feedback that you got, and also how did this then help you get to the awareness that you need to approach this differently, that you needed to have a different strategy, and actually go and ask some customers? So where did that happen?
Yeah, it was kind of a a textbook error, and that we sort of went to options and look or feel and plans too quickly. And fortunately, I'd enough experience. I could feel that we were making this error. It's almost a sense when you're in the room and you're starting to discuss your ideas with people, and people change the subject and they say, well, what's our vision really? Or what's the real purpose of what we're trying to achieve? Or what outcomes will this give for us? Or how will this group be involved? And then you realize you've jumped too soon to, this is this beautiful thing that we can create. People start asking, they take you out the box, and they start asking questions to test your thinking. And no one actually said, why have we not come at this from the customer's point of view, etc. We were, and we were lucky in that, lucky is probably the wrong word, but we were fortunate from the perspective of the project team in that many of the leadership team have authentic experience of either their family members or they themselves live with diabetes, and so they can automatically tell you if something is authentic or not. And our colleague, many colleagues did as well, and so they're both orientated around the company and the products, commercially minded, but also very aware of what it means to live with diabetes. As a patient or as a caregiver, and so we started getting this range of feedback, really questioning, not really sort of saying, oh, I like what you did with that, try that. More sort of these broader based, deeper questions seem to be flushed out with the leadership team. And then we realized that we were just hammering against a brick wall. We needed to think of a new way.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because how this resonates with me, especially also in the context of the systemic, is that what actually happens is that you start working on the project and you bring back what your first initial approach is, and you get, in an indirect way, you get feedback from the system in terms of what is missing. And so even though no one said you should ask a customer, they were holding a piece of that customer experience, because the living with a diabetic or being diabetic is something that was part of them and part of the lens that they were looking through when they were hearing about your approach. And so I find that a fascinating piece that's often missing in terms of, are we sensitive enough to hear what the rest of the system has to say when we are trying to do something that is going to improve our organization and our customer base. So
Yes. No, I think you hit it spot on when you said the feedback was indirect, because the people in the room weren't sure of what we should do. No one could say, hey guys, I've done this before, look here and use this method and you'll be okay. No one had that experience. But what everybody did know was that it wasn't feeling right yet. And so then they explore and they question, and the other thing as well is, I think it wasn't exciting them. It wasn't making them feel anything. People expected this to be a great thing that would make people happy and excited. And it was just not having that effect yet. And we weren't telling them anything they didn't know. And for me, that's also always crucial. When back as a consultant, and if you show up at your client, they pay you to be there because you're supposed to have unique knowledge, and you're supposed to be good at sharing that with them. And we weren't telling them anything they didn't already know yet. And so that's why we had to change.
Wow. It's fascinating to really look at this from a systemic perspective and say, okay, so if we all feel like we don't know, but we do feel that something's not right, and even looking back on it, it's much easier to rationalize it. But actually isn't it interesting that we can sit in a leadership room and have this presentation, know that it doesn't feel right, but we can't rationalize it. So we access a different source of knowing what's good for the organization, and that we need new information that's going to excite us, that's going to make us happy somehow. And those are the big
Yes.
container words that we then have. But it actually means we're looking for that spark in our system that is going to help us move forward and step more into the purpose of why we're here and how we serve our customers. So fascinating.
Yes.
How
Yes.
bring that more into the boardroom. Does it feel right or not?
Exactly. Well, yeah, and so I guess, and I was the one who was presenting each time at these leadership team meetings. I guess I was lucky in that we had a strong team, a group of good colleagues who enjoyed working together. So it wasn't like it was getting shut down. It was more like people would say, so there was still this element of exploration and curiosity there, where they would try different types of questions to help the project move forward, as opposed to just say, it's not right, go away and think again, which would have closed the door.
Yeah. So that piece is also very important. Can we as leadership support the people who are actually part of our system, but trying to create something new? And how can we be supportive instead of just sending them off until they come with something better?
Yes, well, if you're just dismissive, then the thing is, if everybody always knew what needed to be done, innovation wouldn't be as exciting. And so, because it would have been done. And so if you have to have the patience to have the back of the person who's trying to move through and do something that they're not so sure how to do, as long as they can persevere.
Yeah. All right. So there you were. After the exploring and after the continuing on the project, where did you actually make the step towards the customers, to hearing the customer voice more?
So it was actually through a book we had been looking at, and I was in a meeting with my boss at the time, and she had been reading this book, that Business Model Canvas book by Alexander Osterwalder, the well-known one. And we were having this discussion, and I had just read the other one, which was the Customer Value Proposition book. And it was during that where we were just having this back and forth on, it's not working, what's happening? And I said, I want to try this. I want to try this method. And I think this is the way to go. I think we have to step back and build a customer value proposition first. And once we've built that value proposition, we will know how to brand it. The branding will just come. Building the value proposition is going to be most of the work. And then the branding will get the creative agency afterwards, and then we'll brand. And she trusted me. She said, "Okay, all right, go ahead." And that's when, as soon as I was fortunate to be given a bit of budget to contract an innovation agency to help me, which was fantastic. And then that's when, as I started speaking to them and I saw their method, and then we started doing they proposed this interview approach, etc. It started to feel right. And then when we started to first listen to the patients and the doctors, then I knew it was going to work out. Because we started to gather unique knowledge about the critical thing, and we can go into this in a little detail if you want, because this is a favorite subject of mine, was not to phone them up like a physician or a patient and says, "Hi, we're from Medtronic. What do you think of our services? What do you think of our products?" You can't do that. It's automatically introducing bias. And you just get that linear feedback based on who they think you are.
Yeah.
So we actually double-blinded the research and asked open-ended questions about the struggles they faced as people living with diabetes, and what it meant to what living with diabetes meant to them, when it was harder, when it was easier, factors in their lives, etc. And we interviewed a range of people, so from parents of children with diabetes through to adolescents, male and female physicians, and then older people, and then people with diabetes type 2. And so we landed up creating these profiles of type 1 patients across a whole age range, from child, adolescent, young adults, etc., and type 2, and then categorize all of their jobs to be done, which is really a way of categorizing, of expressing their needs based on a functional, social, and emotional perspective.
Could you give it one or two examples of jobs to be done, just for everyone who's watching to have a sense of what that means?
Yeah, the best example that's used for those who are not familiar with this method is the car. And so the functional job of the car is to get you from A to B. The emotional job of the car, depending on which car you buy, let's say you buy a Volvo, it's doing the emotional job of telling you that you bought a high quality car, so you're at a certain level professionally, but at the same time it's safe. And so you've made this emotional choice. And then the social component is what you're telling others. So you're driving a Volvo, it's good quality, it's also safe, so you're also responsible. So so you're sending messages to yourself, to your family, and socially, and at the same time you're getting functional things done. The original research for this was done out of Harvard. They did it with a fast food chain who wanted to increase their milkshake sales, if you can believe it. And so they approached the whole customer analysis piece from the perspective of what is the job that a milkshake does for a person? And then it allowed, it's more than just, quenching your thirst or giving you breakfast. It's also convenience. It's also the taste, the price. If you can make it healthy, you get that responsibility aspect, etc. And so they were able to help this chain build out a much more three-dimensional view of their customer and increase their milkshake sales. So that's not exactly shared value. That's using jobs to be done to increase product sales. But what we wanted to do is really first and foremost gain a genuine understanding into who our customers were, especially the patients. And then from there, build a value proposition that served them authentically. And then brand that.
And from my understanding, does it then mean, when I take the same analogy as what you've just explained with the milkshake, is to say, what are the jobs to be done for our products and what are the jobs to be done for our services? And when we go into the world of our customer, how does that then serve them, but also their family and the wider context of their lives?
Yes, in a way. So the way we did it is we built, the first thing to do is to just immerse yourself in the customer's situation in an authentic way. Another example can be, and we started to have this discussion a little bit at Johnson & Johnson. It's less around, so if your customer is complaining to you that your deliveries are late, of course you need to work to deliver on time. At the same time though, can you try to understand the downward impact on them as individuals and as a professional organization of what this does to their business, and get them to share that with you instead of just hammering you on late deliveries? And there could be things that you can also do that help mitigate those downstream situations that are completely different from delivering on time. Without that insight, you'll never know. And so what we did at first is, and I think this is, the medical companies have a fantastic opportunity to do this more and more and more, and many are doing so now as healthcare changes. This is a huge theme, is to then first off create that, put aside the commercial ambition, although that it is necessary because it's essential that that's achieved, but put that aside for the initial period of research to just immerse yourself in the customer's situation in their life. Then once you understand that, look at what you offer in terms of products and services and see where you can create a mapping of the alignment between things you already do well that will meet that need. And that's a beautiful sweet spot to start with, because you can then start to communicate, by the way, and I can give you an example from our project. By the way, you may have been unaware of this, but we do this today, and this will help you with exactly this thing that you say is terribly difficult. And many times people are just not aware of that. And then the other thing it lets you do is, so once you hit the sweet spot where you have an intersection of products you have or services you do that meet unique needs, you can then roadmap future developments based on what you know they want, or based on how you know their therapy will evolve, or especially if you have an age profile. So you know someone will move from adolescence through transition to university and then into adulthood. You can start to design lifetime services.
Yeah. And this is what I find fascinating. So actually what you're saying is we are reconnecting the how our customers are living and evolving, so that the way we live and evolve as an organization, because the customer and them buying our products is such a big piece of our expression of our purpose, we need to align these journeys. I can't find a better word for that. So it's actually a realignment through who are we doing this for? What is their journey? What are their needs? And how much are we aligned with that now? And can we do more of where we do well in the alignment? And what does that mean for our future steps or our future journey? Right.
Exactly. And so we uncovered one of the main insights we had was the existence of extremely vulnerable populations within the diabetes population, and these life events that many of them inevitably went through, that were a cause of extreme stress for them and their whole caregiver network. And the vulnerable population is really around adolescents with type 1 diabetes, because when children get diabetes type 1, their parents, it's a massive impact for family. There's a whole subject area to do with that, but the parents primarily, or the caregiver network, start to manage the therapy for the child and with the child, especially if you're using a device. But then with adolescence and the onset of adolescent development, as well as the need for more freedom, the families have to make a transition to some self-management, but they are still able to a degree, manage it together. But then what happens is the transition from adolescence to university or leaving home. And this is a hugely stressful event. And what we also found is that these life events can be exacerbated by certain other factors, such as divorce or death in the family, etc., which in fact do happen with families living with diabetes because of the stress they're under. And so we at that time had a service that was entirely geared, it was like this hypercare with especially well-trained people, many of whom were living with diabetes themselves, and system and data support that wrapped around the patient to literally carry them through the therapy through that time. And it was a really high quality service. And we had a whole lot of, the data, we were using big data, everything. But this was previously a service that was communicated to someone when they got a pump, oh, and by the way, we'll do this for you. And people were like, okay. And meanwhile, it was a really great thing that certain populations could really benefit from. So we started to promote this more, and it was already working well. So we were lucky with that.
Yeah. Wow. So especially the fact that it was already working well, but and then it was a matter of making the customer base more aware of the availability of it, and it's actually part of the package for them, especially if they are in this vulnerable group.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things we wanted to do, if we talk a little bit more about the commercial aspect now, was give the sales reps something else in their bag to pull out when they were in a challenging sales conversation. Because what happens with some medical devices in markets where there's reimbursement, that the patient doesn't get they don't get much of an informed choice. Some caregivers will pull out a range of pumps from a range of companies, and they will say, you can just pick one that you like, because they all basically do the same job. And to be honest, you could argue whether, of course, the manufacturers think that theirs is superior, but they do the pretty similar job. And if you have a company like Medtronic versus a company like Roche or Johnson & Johnson, these are all great companies. And so they're all producing good quality products, and they're all regulated. So how do you differentiate your product in the mind of the nurse who is advising the patient of what to do? And so that's how they wanted to also say, over and above, it's not just this device quality, it's this relationship you're going to have with us. initially for your warranty period, but potentially for your life, and we're here for you. And that was what we wanted our salespeople to be able to say.
Yeah. And so, if I sum this up, then what you're saying is the information from the customer, but you also said earlier that there were employees who were very familiar with
Yes.
either being diabetic or living with someone who has diabetes. Do you think that the fact that was part of it, that you have employees who are in that world, really helped you with this project?
Yes, so what we did is we made the employees part of the campaign.
Uh-huh.
So because services are about people, and so we couldn't brand, we didn't want heavy product branding with services messaging. And so we actually created video stories, social media threads and stories, but all built around our actual employees. Not all of whom live with diabetes, but for those of them that do, we were able to create these really authentic, video dialogues of what their job meant to them and why they believed that the service they offered was meaningful. But not in they were not pitching. We didn't have them pitch the service in the video. They just talked about what it meant to them and what they did. And then these employees were part of the campaign. So the way we did it is we set up, the campaign was designed so that patients could look at a series of services. You could think of them almost like service pillars, service A, service B, and then there would be a rationale for what the service was, why it was meaningful, the life event for the patient that it connected to, and then it would have a specific employee or employee group who were dedicated to delivering that service. So the whole thing lined up top to bottom. And the employees were, the pictures we used were of the employees. And so everything front to back felt authentic. And for the services employees, they were hugely engaged because this was the first time ever that they had been brought to as one put it, out of the shade and into the spotlight to showcase what we do every day. And so they absolutely loved it. And so their engagement really increased. So we had that benefit too.
So isn't this interesting? So there's a group of employees who do a tremendous amount of important work in the services area, and that this was actually the first time where they were put into the spotlight, where they could actually share about what they thought was the meaning of their work and how they experienced that and why they thought it was important.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, they did, so these are the people who deal with the patients every day on the phone, sometimes face-to-face, and the salespeople. They are acknowledged within the company, and so they are acknowledged. But at the same time, with these heavily technical and R&D-centric product companies, the product and the R&D and the marketing people and the sales leaders are very prominent forces within these companies. But what this said to the people is that you are a commercial asset for our success. And we're going to tell people about this in the market for the first time. And so that over and beyond the odd sort of, you guys are doing a good job, this type of acknowledgement was really, really beneficial because it's what they all believed. They knew that they were doing an essential job day to day. But it's different when the company really stands up and says, yeah, you are. We're going to go and we're telling people about you because that's how important you are now.
Right. And so we're talking about the customers and the employees and services. How about the leaders? How did you involve the leaders in all this? Because there was a presentation at some point where you were all exploring because no one really knew what the answer was, but something felt off. And so where do they come back into this project, the leaders?
So we created a whole internal education and marketing campaign around our campaign because it was new and also because we were not the marketing department doing it. So we had to do a lot of engagement workshops, feedback workshops, and we pulled together people from all over the business, from each department. So and this was something that we knew from previous experience was essential. So we didn't make a mistake with this. We knew we needed to do it this way. And so we brought a range of people in and captured all of their feedback. And did this in quite a public way. So everyone knew we were doing these workshops. Everyone could see the output of the workshops, and they could see how their feedback was incorporated or not. And if we didn't incorporate their feedback, we could tell them why. And then through that process, leadership was involved. So leaders would come into the room with mixed teams and more junior teams. And then we would show up at the leadership forums as well. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't like everything was just flowing beautifully and super smooth. We had quite a few meetings in preparation for senior leadership pitch meetings where the branding was off, or the pictures were ridiculous, or the messaging was too emotive or crazy, or etc. So there was that. But, you know, which is, in my mind now, the benefit of hindsight is more like that's kind of buried in the detail. Overall, the process was good. But of course, at the time when you're going through those meetings and people are tearing apart your latest version, you have to smile your way through that one.
That's beyond stress testing. That's almost like, how do I stay alive in this?
It's just put your smile on and agree and take notes and then go and fix things. So, but then ultimately, because everyone was we just kept them informed as best we could along the way, but also informed them that everyone knew and everyone was supportive. So it wasn't like it was secret and suddenly it was this big reveal. In my career, those secret big reveals are always the road to potential ruin. And so that's how we engaged them with it. And they started to, you know, I think especially when the employees loved it. What's a leader going to do? You know, all the employees are saying, this is what we need to do. It's really great. And the leader asked for it in the first place, and it looks good. You know, you're going to be able to do it. The only thing that can get you with then is project cost management. But you know, when you're managing a new thing that you haven't done before, sometimes you can't always nickel and dime everything. But ultimately, you know, I think once we got clear and we did then get the marketing department involved. And once they had actually said, you know what, you didn't mess it up too bad, the senior leaders really loved it. And then we did this final launch, which was the formal launch, where they asked us to do it in the form of a TED Talk.
Oh, okay.
And so that was perfect because we didn't have to do all the detail and the metrics and this is the project plan. We just did these big impact statements and we had created this new credo statement, which is almost like a new sort of purpose-driven statement for what it meant to deliver services to people with diabetes. And this was this quite emotive statement. And so I pitched this, and I'd learned this thing off by heart. It was almost like a poem, and pitched this thing. And so, you know, there was this overall sense that you've done something meaningful and it looks good, and let's hope it helps our salespeople compete effectively in the market.
Yeah. Wow. So, so if we are to summarize this, when you look back, what was the impact on all these different groups within the system? So the customers, the employees, the leaders, you as a project team, what was the overall impact and outcome?
So let me answer that question in two ways. There was this immediate impact, which we've already discussed, but then there is the long-term impact, which is actually the really hard part, where if you want to make a systemic change and you want to sustain something new, the fundamental level of change you need to consider and the systemic point of view you need to take is very hard to keep for leaders to, I think, stay on, especially in a quarterly driven P&L based business.
Because what are the challenges? What do you think the challenges are for them to actually look at it from that lens?
So if you remember, I said that we had the opportunity to create this initial campaign with the initial services that really met the needs, and
Yeah.
that went well. And that's still going well,
Yeah.
and that's great. But the future roadmap of being able to invest in and build and create and then launch
Yeah.
services, not just the
Yeah.
brand messaging, that you know will meet a
Mhm.
need, you know it will meet a need, but you don't know what your return
Yeah.
will be necessarily. Takes, more than, and then offset with regular financial pressure, means that the level of leadership commitment and organization commitment needs to become almost
Yeah.
cultural. You have to almost change what it is the company is
Yeah.
about to then sustain that sort of
Yeah.
roadmap. And that was also the lesson learned, is that these types of initiatives can be very effective in short to medium
Mhm.
term, and they can have huge long-term
Yeah.
potential. But the level of commitment required should not be
Yeah.
underestimated.
Yeah. And and we spoke about this a little bit in our pre-call, is that this third bit has very much to do with how do we incorporate this process that we just went through and was successful, like you said, for the short term and midterm. How do we do this in such a way that it becomes part of our DNA? Because it's a new way of accomplishing what we set out to do in the first place when we look at our purpose. And so it's not like the organization totally changes in the sense that, oh, we have a totally different purpose now, but we are evolving in the way we serve our customers even better than we do before, because they are now much more aware of what we offer. And we now have the information from our customers about what their needs are, and we can anticipate on that in the future. So there's this classic balance between what do we do short term and what do we do long term. And you phrase that as, what's the level of commitment that we have as leadership? I would also translate that as, what is our way of changing systemically in the later phase of these type of projects? Because in the beginning, there was this revelation of, oh, we are becoming aware that our customers don't see, or we don't emphasize so much the quality of our services, and we don't sell it as much. So there's this awareness within the system. And then there's this interaction with the customer and with everyone else who's closer to home, our employees and maybe even leaders who have this experience of our core product around the diabetes type 1. And so, and then there's a third phase where it's not just about how do we shape this change, but it's also about how do we incorporate the way we change into our way of doing business, in our way of evolving. And that's where the commitment needs to be. That's where the longer haul needs to be. And at least that's what I see in many organizations, where leaders are have great difficulty in really leveraging that long-term, not just view, but also commitment and action, to actually make that process sustainable, innovation and renewal. Because that's how we started off with. If an innovation wasn't so much fun, but on the other hand, innovation is also about disrupting yourself all the time. And
Exactly.
and that is for many people a difficult thing to hold. So yeah.
I agree.
So
No, I think for leaders it's challenging. There's so many competing things on their agenda, and when you are in, it also gets to, and I thought about this, is it also gets to the heart of who the company is. So there's your purpose and your intent, but the heart of who you are is also to do with your core product and the energy you expend to make that product, to develop that. And in the medical field, these products evolve and develop all the time. And as companies are able to get new clinical proof for new features or new types of therapy or smaller products, or etc., their ability to get patients excited about this and to generate returns is still disproportionately larger than their ability to get returns from services. And so in some ways, I think for these types of companies, it's cyclic, because as they go through a product development cycle and they have a great product to bring to market, it's almost natural and it makes sense that they all line up behind making that product successful. But then when they go through a plateau period, or the period of time in between product releases, or the cadence, they need to look to other things, and that's when you'll see the potential for service innovation come through more. But having these processes understood explicitly, as I described, is a life's work, right? People get distracted by so many competing priorities and urgent, emergencies that crop up that can wipe out a month, which is a lot of a quarter. And so, making progress, that's why I do think of it as this, it almost becomes cultural, a belief, a leadership. This is what we do. We do this, and we also do this all the time, and I think it is, again, to use the word journey, for certain companies to then realize that they can please customers in different ways other than just by introducing fascinating new technology all the time, is also a journey.
It's almost like that can be a product cycle, and then when you're sort of in the between space, that you then do a services cycle, or what the journey cycle of reflection and what's the world of our customer when they use this new product, and
right. So if you can set a culture or a mandate that's it, we will always be innovating, always be improving, always be listening. Whether or not we respond with a service or a product is based on many other factors. But we can guarantee to you we're always listening, we're always innovating, But the energy that takes it takes ongoing energy.
So that would require to almost see, okay, if we invest in that, what's going to happen for our company long term. Because many leaders are in their leadership roles, whether they are aware or not, or whether they like it or not. Many of them are focused on short to mid-term and not on the long term, or they're not going to be around when the long term becomes today. And so,
exactly. There's these personal competing agendas, and it takes, I did some crowdsourced innovation work recently, and the technology that supports crowdsourced innovation just from a data gathering point of view is really good. But what I learned was surprising to me is you still need to let's say you run an innovation challenge that deals with a crowd of 500 people. You need a team of probably 3 to 4 people, relatively senior, managing that almost full time for the duration of that period. So the investment it takes to just get ideas is not insignificant, right? And so and if you say, oh, we should do this all the time, then it implies an infrastructure that makes that happen all the time. And rather than every now and then someone expresses a passion and gets put up.
Yeah, exactly. And when we first started off, when you started explaining about this particular case study, you said, well, we found ourselves in an environment, or this entire industry finds itself in an environment where there's many competitors and disruptors, and so I think that part of the ROI is also to have an organization that is prepared to disrupt itself and have that as a continuous process, so that it can remain alive and it can extend its longevity, especially in a market that's so competitive. So
exactly. But the company knows this. You know, we would see incumbents at conferences, and a lot of the time, the form factor of their new devices looked really cool. You know, a lot of different colors, much slimmer and smaller, all looking good. But when you ask them about services, they would refer you to a wiki page or something like it. And so we would know that over time they wouldn't be able to compete unless they could figure out how to ramp up a service infrastructure. But the problem is, for patients, it's so disruptive in the medium term. So you're sitting there, and then these new people arrive, and they go, look, it fits, you know, it's much more, it fits with your outfit, or whatever they say. People want to give it a try because they're living with the disease. They want to try anything that'll make that a little bit easier. And so it's disruptive. And then they have to learn the lesson. Oh, the service wasn't good, and they let me down with this, and now I'm back to my previous device. Meanwhile, in between times, you've had that disruption, and so you have to try to counter that with message. Right message.
Yeah. So when you look back on the project and the impact that it had, maybe even up until this point today, if you could do it all again, what would you do differently, if anything?
I would have tried not to make the mistakes in the beginning. So, well, I wouldn't make the mistakes in the beginning. So I was fortunate to have a little bit of it, not so much branding, but a similar project before, and we just started straight away with jobs to be done, and it worked out well. I would have worked harder on the last piece, because the job was to build the brand and launch the brand. And this took a huge amount of effort, and we launched it in over 100 countries. The kind of the business case that would support the forward-looking roadmap, I think could have had more meat on it to get leaders interested over the longer term. If I think of something we could have done. We could have shown them possibilities, how you can continue to walk down this road without too much investment. I think it all felt like, well, we've done this great job. Let's see what returns we get from this brand. And we've got some ideas in the bag, and we'll work on those when the time comes, as opposed to a business case for a form of sustained change.
Yeah. Wow. And how about you? When you look back on this project, how did this project and the approach and everything that you shared today about it, how did that impact you in terms of your leadership and your life? You shared a bit in the beginning that, oh, this is the work I want to do. Could you share more about that? How did it impact you?
Yeah, sure. So it made me explore areas around shared value creation, much more around this whole huge topic now around how patient engagement makes commercial sense. Much more into healthcare solutions, but for other types of business, not only, I'm quite healthcare centric at the moment, but a lot of my career has worked with a range of different companies, and I would happily work with different companies again if we could work in this way, where you are looking at creating value for a customer group or a patient group or a community group, but where those groups also understand that you as a company have the right to have value too. But where you do need to probably, as the company, give up some of your value in order for them to have some. And so this whole holistic approach around, but starting with what they really are looking for so that you can do the right thing first or sooner, is a big area of interest for me, that I'm trying to now, as I look through the next half of my career, to see how I will grow into the right kind of organizations and be the right kind of leader for that sort of work. If I can do that sort of work, I'll be happy. I don't really mind the context.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that bit. I think that's an inspiration for everyone who's watching. And one more thing, because we've almost come to the end of our session today, is out of all that you've shared today, if there is one thing that if it were up to you that viewers take away from this session, then what would that be?
You know, I still think it is around, it might sound a bit cliched, but when you're in the moment of trying to do new things, and people are, even if they're polite and they're not getting it, you need to not give up. You need to persevere and believe that what you're doing is the right thing, and make your case with unique knowledge that they don't have. And that was the mistake we made in the beginning. We were making our case with all this perseverance and passion, but we weren't telling them things they didn't know. As soon as we found unique knowledge that the decision makers did not have, we got ourselves into a position of relative authority and could then make a stronger case to move ahead. And for me, that's a lesson I've always tried to learn in my career. Find the thing they don't know that also solves their problem.
Yeah. So maybe that's not just the leaders, but also in your communication with your customers.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Jeremy, we've come to the end of our conversation, and we have been talking about a very profound and unique experience that you had with Medtronic in the diabetes product, and trying to emphasize the services aspect and incorporate that in the branding and the communication with customers, so that in the end they could be served even better. Yeah, I'd like to thank you so much for being here in the Systemic Leadership Summit with us and sharing this experience.
Thank you. I loved it. It was a great discussion. Thank you so much.
And also, for everyone who has been watching, thank you so much for watching in this session with Jeremy Lloyd. And if you'd like to take the conversation further, then please do so in our online community space. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.